Leading Education Towards Successful Teaching and Lasting Knowledge, or Let's Talk, is a podcast that discusses relevant topics and issues in education management and governance. Hosted by Dr. Evelie Serrano, Dr. Monica Walet, and Dr. Emely Dicolen, Let's Talk is an extension initiative of the Institute for Governance and Rural Development, College of Public Affairs and Development, University of the Philippines, Los Baños. Dr. Evelie is an associate professor and the director of IGRD CPAf. An education enthusiast and lifelong learner, she is passionate about improving the quality of teaching and learning through teacher training and education. An assistant professor at IGRD CPAf, Dr. Monica has occupied academic and leadership positions in higher education institutions in the Philippines and Singapore. A registered psychologist, she is a well-known mental health advocate and speaker who designs and facilitates training programs aimed at promoting mental health and well-being. Dr. Emely is an associate professor and currently the college secretary of UP Manila's National Teacher Training Center for the Health Professions. A dynamic administrator and education manager, she has introduced innovative programs and projects in various institutions of higher learning. Let's Talk, every Wednesday on the UPLB College of Public Affairs and Development Facebook page as we lead education toward successful teaching and lasting knowledge.
Hello! Magandang araw sa ating lahat. Welcome to the 4th episode of Let's Talk. Wow! 4th episode na tayo. This is Evelie and with me are Dr. Emely and Dr. Monica. Dr. Emely and Dr. Monica, what would you like to say to our listeners who are tuned in today?
Hello po sa lahat ng nakikinig sa ating episode ngayon. Thank you so much dahil patuloy niyo po kaming pinakikinggan, at sana po ay makaka-relate uli kayo sa aming pag-uusapan ngayon.
Marami po salamat. Kami po ay nagagalak at na-inspire to work harder and find ways to really reach out sa mga fellow teachers, scholars, and education managers and enthusiasts through this medium.
Yes, thank you very much to our listeners. Please join us every Wednesday as we discuss different topics related to education management and governance. For this first season of Let's Talk, our focus is on managing teaching and learning in the time of a global pandemic, and hence our topic so far on readiness for blended learning and the perceived impacts of remote learning to students and teachers. As an offshoot of our previous episodes, pag-uusapan naman natin ngayon ang learning loss and unfinished learning. According to the World Bank, the COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted education in over 150 countries and affected 1.6 billion students. As an emergency response, many countries, including the Philippines, implemented some form of remote learning. After 2 years, most schools in the Philippines are still on remote learning, and many are worried about its implications, especially among children. While remote learning modalities were intended to reach all students, they were not always successful. The negative impacts of remote learning have been very much felt. In addition, findings of recent research on learning loss have started to trickle out. A study conducted by the consulting group McKinsey & Company in the US last year found that students, on average, could be behind by up to 9 months in math, for example. Now, what exactly is learning loss? Let's hear from Dr. Emely and Dr. Monica.
Thank you, Evelie. Maganda yung tanong na yan, kasi talagang pinag-uusapan, mainit na talakayan ang nangyayari ngayon tungkol dyan. So, when you say learning loss, it refers to the loss of knowledge, skills, and competencies that students experience when they are not in school. Like, for example, during summer break, semestral break, or long vacations from school. But in our context, na-highlight yung learning loss due to the COVID-19. Kasi nga, di ba, nagkaroon tayo ng closures ng mga schools and therefore remote teaching and learning ang nangyari.
Nako, tama ka, Dr. Emily. And learning loss happens when there is disruption in the formal schooling. Masasabi natin na these 2 years of emergency remote learning and teaching, or not even taking the online learning facilities offered in public and private schools due to the pandemic, is the most disruptive. Alam niyo, in the Philippines pa lang, around 3 million learners have either not enrolled in primary schools at all or have not returned to it in the 2021 academic year. For context, according to 𝘴𝘢𝘮𝑗𝑗, this number is almost equal to the entire population of Quezon City, a highly urbanized city in Metro Manila. So the COVID-19 pandemic forced the students to take a gap year. Datos yan ng 2021. Pero ngayong 2021-2022, umabot na sa 5 milyon ang di nakapagrehistro or nag-drop out na sa schooling sa pampublikong paaralan.
Oh my! No wonder ang daming nagsasabi na there is learning loss. Millions of Filipino learners are out of school. And for those who are in school, teachers and school administrators are worried if these children are really learning. Especially since there have been disruptions in schooling, lalo na nung first year of the pandemic. Which brings us now to the concept of unfinished learning. Can you tell us about unfinished learning, Dr. Monica? Ano ba ang pagkakaiba nito sa learning loss?
Actually, halos pareho lang yan. Pero isa sa mga pangunahing pagkakaiba sa pagitan ng dalawang terms na ito ay ang kanilang konsepto. Ang learning loss ay maaring panghinaan ng loob, demotivating yan, hindi lamang sa mga guro, kundi maging sa mga estudyante na makita ang lahat ng natamo nila ay nawala. On the other hand, ipinahiwatig ng unfinished learning na bagamat hindi kumpleto, the journey keeps on. May progreso pa ang mga estudyante.
So, Doc Monica, ang sinasabi mo ba ay ang unfinished learning ay isang mas positibong pananaw o pagtingin sa kung anong klaseng learning ng mga students ngayon? Which I totally agree with. Tulad nga nung sinabi ng isang article na nabasa ko. Sabi dito, compared to learning loss, unfinished learning carries a much more positive meaning. Something that may even help encourage educators or students and families to approach learning gaps with optimism instead of fear. Sabi nga hindi man nila natututunan ang lahat ng mga dapat nilang matutunan, ay meron din naman silang natututunan. In fact, may mga bago silang natututunan na kung hindi dahil sa pandemic, ay hindi nila matututunan. Oh, nagets nyo ba? Nalito ba kayo? Pero tama naman yung sinabi ko, di ba?
Oo, tongue twister ba yan? Pero agree ako dyan, Dr. Emily. For example, yung pamangkin ko who is in grade 6, biglang nahilig maggitara during the pandemic. Parang naging coping mechanism niya. At ang galing na niya maggitara ngayon. So there may have been some learning loss, but there are also learning gains. For instance, our students and teachers have become more resourceful, creative, and yes, resilient. In our situation din kasi ngayon, we make the most of what we have. We have seen, therefore, how students accomplished projects with limited resources. We have witnessed how they were able to develop their ingenuity. And this is also true for teachers who have been trying their best to facilitate effective teaching and learning despite limited resources. So, but still, nakakabahala pa rin ang mga datos ngayon, which brings us to my next question. What are the lingering effects of learning loss and unfinished learning?
Lingering effects? Ako siguro medyo personal yung hugot ko. Kasi ako mismo nakita ko ito sa aming 5-year-old na apo. Na-observe ko kasi na yung supposedly social skills na pwede niyang matutunan sa kanyang mga kaklase in a face-to-face setting ay nawala. 'Di ba? Tayo kunyari nung mga bata tayo or even mga preschoolers na observe natin. 'Di ba ang saya-saya nila kapag pumapasok sila sa school kasi ang dami nilang mga kaibigan. Pero alam nyo, yung apo namin, ito talaga, obserbahan namin na pag tinatanong namin siya kunyari, how many friends do you have? Tapos isasagot niya, I have 5 friends. Pero alam niyo ba, out of 5 friends, 3 ang adults, dadalawa lang talaga yung halos kaedaran lang niya.
Oh, sad.
Sad naman. Naku, talaga importante ang social interaction, lalo na sa primary students. Kaya nga isa sa mga observation ng mga magulang ngayon ay ang pagkakahumaling sa Roblox. Alam niyo ba ito? It's an online game platform that allows users to program games and play games created by other users. Dito na sila nakakamit ng friends virtually using avatars or symbolic selves or idealized selves.
So, bale, there is no real interaction dito sa Roblox, ano? Ano lang, para lang mere projection of the needs of the users, tama ba?
Tama. Natatandaan niyo ba yung theory ni Erik Erikson on psychosocial development? Importante sa lifelong development ng tao ang makipag-ugnayan. Sa mga nag-aaral, yung bang exposure and experiences nila with their significant others. Sa simula, mga magulang o tagapag-alaga. Pero pagpasok sa eskwelahan, ang mga importante na silang tao ay ang mga kalaro, klase, teachers. Dito kasi sa formal na struktura, nahuhubog ang kanilang pagkatao, ugali, values at attitude sa buhay. Isa sa mga pagsubok at katanungan na dapat mabigyan ng liwanag o katiyakan ay, am I good or bad? Nadidiskubre ito ng bata sa paglalaro at pag-explore ng kanyang paligid sa preschool years niya. Nadidiskubre niya ito na, may purpose pala ako. Kaya ko palang gumawa sa pamagitan ng sarili kong effort. Kasunod nito ay ang pagsubok ng pinaibigbod. Paano ko pananatiliin ang ganitong kakayanan? So competence is now formed in the formal school through healthy competition, social comparison, friendships, and camaraderie. Ito yung mga oportunidad na nagambala sa growth ng mga bata during the forced remote learning.
Alam mo, Doc Moody, totoo yan. Importante talaga yung early development ng bata, no? Lalo yung kanyang social skills. Pero alam mo, sa akin may isa namang malaking bagay na naidulot yung pandemic kasi mas naging involved and engaged ang mga magulang sa learning activities ng mga anak nila. In fact, isa nga ito sa mga recommendations ng UNESCO na dapat daw ma-strengthen yung collaboration, no, ng parents with teachers, parents with the school. Kaya nga lang, alam nyo, minsan, eto ha, I'm sure guilty rin kayo dyan. Ang mga magulang mismo ang gumagawa ng mga lessons na dapat talaga, yun ay gagawin o tatapusin ng mga anak nila. Minsan, sa sobrang involvement nila, hindi na nila namamalayan na sila na mismo yung nakikipag-compete. No, it's a competition among parents. Hindi na nung kanilang mga mismong anak. Ito naman yung nakita ko talagang effect nung too much naman, no? Too much involvement ng mga magulang. Kaya tuloy ang dami dyan, bato-bato sa langit, ang tamaan ay tamaan, no? Maraming mga stage mom, stage dad, ano pa, stage lola, stage lolo, stage tito, tsaka stage tita.
Sinabi mo, Dr. Emily, nakakabahala rin ito kasi children may end up being too reliant on their parents and guardians. Paano sila makaka-develop ng sense of independence niyan, di ba?
Oo, nako, share ko lang mga incidents ng mga friendships ko na super involved sa mga projects ng mga anak nila. Imagine, production numbers, grabe. May video editing sa mga project ng mga bagets. Kaya ba ng mga bata yan? So, it's a violation sa authentic assessments, di ba?
Yung assessment na yan, Doc Monica, Doc Evelie, malaking usapin yan na palagay ko ay kailangan nating pag-usapan sa susunod na episode. Alam nyo, isa pang naging effect sa tingin ko lang ng learning loss according to a survey ay yung widened pre-existing gaps in terms of achievement and proficiency of students. Pre-pandemic, totoo namang may mga challenges na. Sa ilang mga learners natin, lalo pang na-heighten ngayon because of the pandemic. At alam nyo, ang nakakalungkot dito ay mas higit na apektado na naman, alam nyo na, yung mga learners natin na walang access to education. And when we say challenges, hindi lang of course in terms of the capacity to learn intellectually, but also the challenge of not being able to learn because alam mo na, you lack the resources. Halimbawa, wala ka naman talagang gadget na gagamitin sa remote learning. Tapos yung connectivity mo pa, hindi maganda. Alam mo, lahat ng issues na to. So talagang lalong lumalaki yung gap. Noong dating merong gap, na ngayon ay lalo pang lumalaki. Nagets nyo ba yon? O yun yon. So, ang isa pang naging dahilan pagkakaroon ng learning loss or unfinished learning ay yung reality na iba-iba din kasi yung haba ng panahon ng school closures sa iba-ibang lupalop ng daigdig. For example na lang dito nga sa Pilipinas, di ba? Yung mga ibang parts ng Philippines like let's say Region 1 dahil mas kakaunti yung kanilang mga naging victims kumbaga ng COVID-19, mas nauna naman silang nag-remote learning. Sa ibang mga lugar na mas marami yung cases, mas nahuli sila. So doon pa lang, kita mo na talaga yung gap na lalong lumalaki.
Tama kayo, Dr. Emily. Lumaki talaga ang gap between those who can afford to access education amidst the pandemic and those who lack resources. Mas lalong napag-iiwanan ang mga nasa laylayan. Considering now the effects of learning loss, how can we mitigate the learning loss in schools? How can we transform learning loss to learning gains? Is that even possible?
Posible naman yan, Doc Evelie, sa tingin ko. No? At ang isang paraan na naisip ko ay through remediation. Remediation is a process of identifying the skills and competencies of a learner and making him or her master these skills and competencies before moving to the next skill. Pwedeng i-identify ng teachers yung mga skills na yon. Then, put these learners all together in a small group, teach or reteach, hanggang sa matutunan nila yung skills and competencies na kailangan talaga.
Alam mo, Dr. Emily, ang potential problem naman ng remediation ay mas lumalayo yung gap ng learners kasi while yung iba ay nag-remediation, yung iba naman ay naka-advance na.
Totoo yan. Pero alam mo, may isa pa. Yung tinatawag nilang acceleration. Ito yung proseso of allowing the learner to master new skills based on the skills and competencies that he or she currently has. Yung without having to go back to the skills and competencies that he or she failed to master. Acceleration prepares students for new learning opportunities.
Pero, di ba, ang issue naman sa acceleration is that the teacher might have a difficulty adjusting his or her lessons to individual learners. And the tendency that learning might slow down kapag nasa bahay nila, especially when parents are not equipped with appropriate skills to reinforce the learning.
Oo, tama ka rin naman. Ano ba yan? Napaka-komplikado. Pero sige, alam mo, meron pa akong isang naisip na effective na paraan para ma-mitigate ang learning loss or unfinished learning. Meron akong nabasang research. Ang sabi doon ay isang paraan daw is to build strong relationships. And when we say build strong relationships among learners, between teachers and learners, and even with family members. Kasi daw, according to that research, the learners can benefit from this because they feel they belong. Alam mo yon yung alam nilang may kasama sila, hindi sila nag-iisa, may support sila. And when they feel that security, they become more engaged in the teaching-learning process.
It's good to know, that there are ways by which we can mitigate learning loss in schools. Conducting remediation, facilitating acceleration, and establishing a strong relationship with your support group. Extra challenge nga lang itong remediation and acceleration for our teachers. So school management should ensure that teachers receive the support that they need. Similarly, government and other stakeholders must extend support to our schools. I believe it takes collaborative effort to manage learning loss. How about you, Dr. Monica? What would you recommend?
Alam mo, dapat gawan ng masusing pag-aaral ano ba talaga ang nawala or the long-term impact of this gap years. Sa ngayon kasi, kakaunti pa lang ang release na studies sa larangan na ito, mostly from international journals pa. And from that data, the government, school administrators, the teachers can come up with programs that would address the needs of the school leavers, dropouts, and encourage them to go back to school without discrimination. Yung bang may programa na makakope sila sa mga competencies na di nila nakuha o napag-aralan during the time of their absence. We need a clear and motivating pathway back to school.
I strongly agree, Dr. Monica. We really need research-based programs and interventions to address this issue of learning loss and unfinished learning. Reflecting on what we have discussed today about learning loss and unfinished learning, we can conclude that our students are at a risk of completing school without the competencies, behaviors, and mindsets to succeed in college or in the workforce. Learning loss and unfinished learning are real. And unless we do something about them, more students will be left behind, not just in school, but also in life. To address the problems of learning loss and unfinished learning requires a holistic approach. Programs should be designed to meet academic and non-academic needs of students. And this must be done in consultation and collaboration with students, parents, and other stakeholders. Kailangan natin marinig ang mga boses nila so that in turn, we can come up with programs that really meet the needs of our learning community. An accurate assessment of the extent of learning loss and unfinished learning must also be conducted. Importanteng malaman muna natin ano ba ang kailangan nating punuan. This will guide us as we try to develop and implement strategies to help our students catch up on the learning that they had missed while in remote learning setup and to develop na rin the competencies needed to better navigate the future. For our next episode, we'll discuss further the challenges and the interventions to address the issues in blended learning, remote learning, and unfinished learning. If you have stories to share, please leave them in the comment section below. Isa na namang bongbong kwentuhan ang magaganap in the next episode of
Let's Talk!